Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute, and I welcome you today to our studio in Honolulu. My guest today and I are going to talk about private property ownership, and you may be puzzled for a moment as to why that isn't intuitively understood as something very important. Thomas Jefferson, who penned much of the Declaration of Independence, spoke of the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Often when I talk with some of my college students today, the third term is not well understood because we tend to think today of happiness in subjective terms, whether I'm glad, whether I'm elated, whether I feel something. For Jefferson and those who penned the Declaration of Independence, happiness was based upon an objective basis. And for them, private property ownership was very much at the heart of being able to build wealth, being able to have independence, being able to have political status, and as a result, the objective basis for being able to pursue happiness. We're going to talk about that a bit today because the ability to own private property, or even the right to own private property, is not an undisputed fact in the world today, in our own nation, and in emerging or developing nations as well. Someone who understands this deeply is Ken Schoolland, a professor at Hawaii Pacific University and a scholar at the Grassroot Institute who travels the world looking for economic solutions for the betterment of all people. And I'm delighted that we're going to be able to talk about some of his travels, some of his research, and the idea of private property ownership today. Please welcome to the program, Professor Ken Schoolland. Ken, delighted to have you on the program today.
Thank you very much, Keli'i. I'm very, very pleased to be here.
Well, beyond our friendship and the many late night talks that we have, I enjoy the professional opportunities we have to talk about some big ideas. And private property ownership is something you've been thinking about for quite a while.
Yes, I recently, well, for the last year, I've been twice to India.
Yes.
To explore some of the important transitions, the revolution that is occurring for hundreds of millions of poor people because of property rights. A lot of times people think that, well, property rights, that's something just applies to the rich, but actually it's something even much more important to the poor to lift themselves out of poverty.
Well, that's an important point because for the poor, you're really going from 0 to 60 or 0 to 1,000 when they are able to acquire property, but for the middle class or the wealthy, it's just more wealth. Mm-hmm. So how does that make such a big difference, going from no private property ownership to actually owning your own piece of property?
Yeah, let me mention a little bit about the circumstance in India. The British, during their colonial rule, decided that they were going to mark out and take, essentially, nationalize large portions of India, I mean very large portions of India as national parks, right, and national forests and so on. And it was in total disregard to the indigenous population, just as the American government did with regard to the indigenous population in the US too. And pretty much swept aside all of their own individual rights to the land and the use of the land. Well, that meant that, and as this land was turned over to the Indian government that practiced the same kind of official ownership of the forest and so on, a complete disregard of the use of the land by the tribals, as it were, the lowest of the low among the caste system in India, I mean beneath even the official caste system there. And they wound up living on land as treated as encroachers on their own land. They were beaten up and they were resigned to just living off of tubers and huddled around fires and with no shelter. The authorities could come and beat them up, could harass them, could take their crops, their cattle, and force them into labor for no income at all. And
now, I'm just going to pause here for a moment to reflect on what you're saying. There's a litany of problems that come with the loss of personal private property. Mm-hmm. They range from the loss of wealth immediately, but you're talking a lot about some political suffering. You're talking about status. You're talking about social problems as well that emerge from not having private property.
Oh, they weren't allowed to do anything on their own, that we'd build a house or a crop and everything. It was all destroyed. They were treated as dirt. And they were afraid of the officials. They were just always trouble for them. And I asked them in a crowd of 300 or so who had gathered at this one village meeting, and I said, well, are you treated any differently today? And they laughed and they said, yeah, Today, when we go into the officials, they invite us to sit down and they offer us water. Now in India, that means you're being treated as an equal with respect. And that had never happened before. And
So,
that was because they had title to the land. Even the pending title, you know, yet to be finally certified, means a world of difference in the treatment the officials had to give to them.
This seems to be almost a universal principle in the United States, in our own history, in the transition from colonies into a young nation. Private property owners were the ones who were allowed to have full access to the political system. And what you're talking about here is that when people are in possession of title to land in India, they are now regarded differently by their own government.
Absolutely. And they're able to transform their lives from penury and absolute poverty and desperation now to very thriving lives where they're able to take care of themselves. They're able to plant crops that they can be assured aren't going to be just taken by anybody who comes along or destroyed by the officials. They can build substantial homes, that they can have lofts, and their bank account is their own surplus crop that they put up for 2 years worth of supplies so that they are secure. They're able to go off to the villages and earn cash income, and they send their children now to schools in record numbers, all of them. In fact, in the villages that I was visiting, they said all of our children go to schools now in the next village or in the cities, and we have many fewer children because we want each one of them to have the best possible opportunities, and we don't have to worry that none are going to survive, so we have to have many children just to have someone survive, take care of us.
That picture is so different from the desperation of families that need to let their children go and pick rags or sell their children and so forth. Instead, you see a transformation of the family into a place that produces not only generational wealth, but actually transforms the culture of those children. Now, I want to come back to this because it's a big shift you've kind of condensed into 3 minutes, which is people going from no private property ownership into becoming private property owners. I'd like to talk a little bit later about how that shift happened. But first, since we're at the start of this discussion, what are some of the other models for taking care of the people or for providing humanitarian relief that for so many decades, for generations, we've practiced in India that have ultimately failed in terms of welfare that is being given as part of philanthropy and going to the greater developed nations and asking them for things to give to the poor?
Yeah, the assumption was that your welfare depended on the government handing you, starvation, assistance and so on, so that you wouldn't starve. But it always was a top-down type of thing, very much a vestige of the old imperial colonial system, but it was carried over very much so through the more socialist system of India, that all real change was going to occur at the top, and it would filter down to the population, and they would be, their lives would be guided. But here, now for the first time, a law was passed called the Forest Rights Act. Trupti Mehta and her husband Ambrish Mehta were instrumental in getting this law passed, which gave recognition to the farmers to establish if they were there in 2005, then they had a right to claim title to their property. And they used now GPS devices and Google Maps, roughly at a cost of about $1 per farm, in getting the training and the technical ability to show exactly where their farms are, where they had, and we used Google Maps from 2005 to show where their berms were, they outlined their fields, where they had mango trees planted, and where they had built a house or something. And that is being used as the proof that they were there, and they have the right to continue on as a property right. And that has just made a world of difference. The government denied 80% of the claims and 80% of the land area, but they kept pushing back because Trupti got her law degree knowing that the law was going to be the way to champion the rights of the poor.
Now, what brought about this reform measure? Was it the leadership and vision of Trupti, or was there a movement? Is it an idea whose time had finally come? How is it that such a remarkable transformation or change took place in terms of property ownership?
Yeah, Trupti and Ambrish first went with a very strong socialist ideal after their college education to the rural areas to try and transform things. But they spent a lot of time with the villagers finding out what it was they needed, and they transformed them. They realized that individual property rights was what they really needed to protect themselves and their own families and their own endeavors with their work to improve their lives. They couldn't count on officials. There was always corruption and always abuse for cronies close to the officials and all that. And they wanted to have a chance to have their own dignity and their own right to push back. And it was going to be through the law. It was sparked by an incident where the officials just took 6 cattle of this one villager. And she gathered around about 300 of the villagers and went to the forest office, and they said, give them back. And what right do you have them? And so finally the officials didn't have anything to say, so the villagers took the cattle back. The next day she was arrested, put in jail, let go the next day, and she came on with a fury of media and legal action that went all the way through the assembly, and the assembly finally passed the Forest Rights Act. Give these people who have long claim to their, action on their land, the right to own it. And now by doing this, it has transformed their lives. Their incomes have soared by this.
Now, you use a word here, the right to private property ownership, the right to land ownership. Prior to gaining this right, what was their status in terms of the land? They lived on it, but was it a lease? Was it indentured servanthood? What was it that they had in their relationship to the land before they got this right?
Well, it's what we would view in the West as a homesteading principle.
Okay.
It was first used by making a living off the land. You know, here you see land that you plant crops, you harvest bamboo, you dig irrigation ditches, you dig wells. In other words, you're improving it for the livelihood of yourself and your family and your community. And that's a principle then of first claim. You can sell the land or sell property and so on that's on that land. And you do so because it improves and betters your life. And that's the first claim. And based on that principle of use to benefit yourself and your family, they believed they had the claim for centuries back from their earliest of ancestors, that moved into the area.
But
And
the
this
current
is
legal
recognizing
system
that.
didn't recognize
No, because when the British nationalized the forest, saying, well, we're going to make a national park
All
out of
right.
it, basically it swept aside all of their individual rights. It's just much like, in a way, you'd have to say the American treatment of the indigenous Indians in the United States was in sweeping aside, pushing the Indians off to reservations and displacing them from their land and their rights to their use of the land because of long-held traditional use and so on.
So now when you talk about the right to own that land, you're talking about full fee simple land that we understand by title here in the United States.
On the national forest, they still don't have what we would say the same as fee simple, because they're not allowed to sell the land to somebody else.
Okay.
They're not allowed to actually cut down teak wood and timber that is the protected vegetation of the national forest. But they can harvest bamboo, they can plant their own crops and sell those crops. So it's still not quite a transferable property right that we would think of with fee simple ownership of a house here in Hawaii, for
Well,
example.
it's a very fascinating conversation so far because you're talking about something that's not only remote to us in Hawaii, but has some tremendous parallels to our situation here. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll keep talking with Professor Schoolland about private property ownership in India, and eventually we'll talk about whether some of the concepts for development may apply to the concept of Hawaiian homelands in the state of Hawaii. I'm eager to hear what he has to say about that. This is Keli'i Akina on ThinkTech Hawaii's E Hana Kākou. We'll be right back after this brief message.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevlin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on the ThinkTech Digital Series. The show is every Wednesday from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and I want you to watch this show because I think that when we talk with artists on the show about what they do, how they do it, and most importantly, why they do it, I believe that it resonates within each of us and we find something inside of ourselves that brings us closer to all of humanity. That's what arts are there to do, and that's what I'm here to do on this show. That's Center Stage. It's on every Wednesday from 2 to 3 o'clock. I hope to see you there.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
Aloha and welcome back to E Hana Kākou. We're on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network, which is sponsored by ThinkTech Hawaii, a tremendous group of people who are putting onto the air 30 to 35 hours of original content every week, and you can get that at www.thinktechhawaii.com. I want to say thanks to Jay Fidel, the producer, and the many staff and volunteers that are in ThinkTech Hawaii. We've been talking about private property ownership and why it is so very important and how it is transforming tens, if not hundreds of millions of Indians in the nation of India as they reacquire their land, stake their claim and develop it, but have ownership over it. And we're with Professor Ken Schoolland. Ken Schoolland is a Grassroot Institute scholar, and he's also a professor at the Hawaii Pacific University. Ken, if I understand it correctly, there are hundreds of millions of Indians who benefit from this? What's the magnitude?
That will be. I mean, right
Okay.
now it's in taking root for about 130,000 cases
Okay.
have been denied by the government, and they're pushing back to appeal these cases, but they're pending. It's across 5 states of India right now. But as the demonstration of the positive benefit of this is broadly realized, and by word of mouth, really, from village to village, it'll be spreading across India, and then I'm expecting that the same sort of thing will spring across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where almost all of these countries have almost no individual property rights for...
That's right.
I mean, the government owns the land, and people are just tolerated to the extent the government allows them to do things, and that is a hard thing for governments to let go of and to give up.
But it's a major first step. As you mentioned a little bit earlier, it's not exactly everything that our fee simple concept is in the United States, but it's getting close to that. And do you anticipate that the nature of the rights of land ownership will actually expand in future years as this becomes part of the culture?
Sure, I am sure that it will, just as it has, for example, in China, under Deng
That's
Xiaoping.
right.
They first allowed farmers then to sell the produce of their land, of the land. They may still not have direct title and ownership of the land, but they can sell the produce of it.
That's right.
And what a transformation that's made in China. And we're seeing that the same kind of thing is taking root in other countries as
And I kind of chuckle when it comes to China, where technically nobody owns the land. It
Yeah.
all belongs to the state. But when you look at the flurry of activity of people buying and selling condos and homes and so forth, as if they owned it, they virtually do own it.
Yeah.
There would be there would be perhaps an uprising should the government come at this stage into the urban areas, the major cities, and attempt to seize from people their condos and their homes and so forth. So I see what you're saying in terms of what could happen in India. Things begin a little slowly and the ball gets rolling. You know, do you have any stories about anybody who has been transformed, any families in terms of the growth of wealth, the capacity to care for their families, the transformation of the very way they live, their pursuit of happiness, so to speak?
Yeah. One fellow that I met, RC was his name, and he was one of the leaders of the community organization that got the really good quality data from the GPS coordination and markings on the maps and all that. His life has been transformed enormously. He said that they were living, they had to eat roots and bark and mix it together with a little bit of milk, and then to have something substantial to eat. His kids had no decent clothing. They were cold and starving. Now it's such a difference. They have grain enough in their loft that can last them for 2 years. They are able to pay one of the villagers to teach the kids up to grade 5, and then they all send their kids off to schools in the nearby towns or in the villages. If they really are good students and all, they all pay twice as much or 3 times as much to go to a mission school in the next city. Their kids are getting training as nurses to come back to be translators for their family to diagnose what their problems are.
That's
and
right.
And they don't have to depend. They used to have to collect their crop and take it to the village and just accept the price that they were given on that day that they went there, because the roads were so bad and it was hard to get there for overtime. So they got there and they had to accept what was given. Now they can use a mobile phone. They can call and check around.
It's
When's the
tremendous.
best price? Who's going to give us the best price? We coordinate our activities with other villagers. We all go it in or deny it to a particular vendor. They can get 30 times as much income now for bamboo. Now, bamboo, it used to be because you couldn't shield it from the cattle or the other farmers or from the officials, it would never grow very big. But now, if you can shield it, it can grow for 3 years, large enough that it can be used for construction material. And they now can sell tons of this to the local mill. The mill used to get a price, you give them a price of, well, they weren't allowed to cut it at all. Only the Forest Service could collect it, and they got about 100 rupees per ton. Now they get 30 times that amount, that price. And I was there with the whole village negotiating with the paper mill how much to get. And the paper mill actually likes this better too, because the farmers now are much more efficient. They can irrigate the fields, they tend the fields, they bring in so much more of the bamboo that they ever got before. So everybody's a winner, except the government officials that have to sit back and stand out of the way.
We're watching on the screen here your interaction with some of the villagers and so forth. They want to tell us what's taking place there, Ken?
This was the village meeting. They had left their homes at around 6:30 in the morning to walk to this village meeting at noon, and we were here talking about. They were conducting a survey to see about the feasibility of solar-powered irrigation.
How about that?
Each household was saying how far they are from the water source, how much elevation there was, and how many days of sunlight that they get. All these were gathered in just a simple survey that they were getting, and this kind of thing was unimaginable just 2 years ago. And now, solar-powered irrigation,
How
in the
about
most
that?
backward realms of India. It's just phenomenal.
Well, let's hope their power utility doesn't say it doesn't fit with their grid.
Yeah.
As in more technologically developed nations. You know, Ken, a lot of your work that you do, it comes from your heart and your mind in terms of values, and that's why you're a scholar at the Grassroot Institute. You believe in the promotion of individual liberty, free markets, and limiting the role government plays and the control it has over people. How has the growth in private property ownership impacted these values for the Indian people?
Oh, it's been phenomenally important. You know, the Fraser Institute out of Canada conducts
Right, one of our
annual
sister
survey.
organizations.
Yeah, the Economic Freedom of the World Index.
That's right.
And they evaluate property rights as one of the criteria that they look at: the size of government spending and taxation, regulatory controls, free trade, and sound money. Property rights is probably the most fundamental issue there, because if you don't have control over it, your incentive for investing your time and energy and the efforts of technology and innovation are vastly gone, because you don't benefit by the result of all that effort. And this has been the findings of the work of Hernando de Soto and Enrique Garci, first in Peru, and the idea that most of the third world lives with informal property rights, where they know who has the property and who's got the business and so on. But the officials don't acknowledge it, and therefore can bulldoze it down at their whim. And that leaves a tremendous uncertainty. You can't take out a loan based on your business potential. You can't build on your property because it can just be taken away tomorrow. But once that's a certainty, and you can guarantee contracts then, you can guarantee loans then, and you can guarantee financing, it can transform people's lives, and has in the United States. We see without these things, imagine how much uncertainty there would be if we didn't have those sorts of things here. And
De Soto and Garci have a vision, a global vision, as a matter of fact. And so the work is not limited to any one place, such as the villages of India and the farms and so forth. But you mentioned earlier regionally. Do you want to comment a bit about that, on how we can see regional transformation as the spread of property rights takes place?
Oh, I'm quite convinced that this idea is so successful that it will be taken up across Asia and Africa and Latin America. And I think there are examples in Africa that this is showing tremendous fruit, and in China too already. And I think that the same can be recognized as something valuable here to the people in Hawaii. You know, as you are the expert in knowing how difficult it is for people of Hawaiian ancestry to work the land, have access to the land when they don't have the property rights to work the land. They have to kind of beg for things from officials that are very imperious in their attitude towards the population.
So there are clearly applications not only in what we would term third world nations, but here at home, and you and I will talk about that in our final segment today. You know, the viewers may be interested in some of your research, and do you want to let them know where to find it? And you currently have some of that research posted on our website, and you're updating that as well.
Yes. A year ago, I posted an article about my preliminary work with the people in India and in Nepal, on the Grassroot Institute website.
That's grassrootinstitute.org.
Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, yes, that's right.
And the website is grassrootinstitute.org.
.org, yes.
And go ahead.
Right, that's right. And I'm currently completing a paper that I'm submitting to the Journal of Private Enterprise that I'm hoping will publish this. And we will do a broadcast of this kind of news across all of our networking. We have a conference this summer in Bali, the World Conference on Market Liberalization.
That's right.
That I'm encouraging everyone to come. There'll be people, right now we've got 40 speakers from countries all over the world. We've got people, many from Asia, but many from everywhere else that are going to be coming and talking about this kind of transformation.
That's exciting.
And one topic that I'm giving there is about the importance of migration to this whole picture of how to encourage entrepreneurs. You allow the people to move to where they do entrepreneurship
That's
fast.
right. Well, if you want some more information on Ken's work and even on the conference, go to the Grassroot Institute website, grassrootinstitute.org. And you can also get a hold of Professor Schoolland here in downtown Honolulu anytime. We're going to take a final break, but when we come back, you won't want to miss this. I'm going to ask Ken about how applicable these concepts are to the situation of Hawaiian homelands here in the state of Hawaii. We'll be right back after this short message on ThinkTech Hawaii's E Hana Kako.
Inspired by an ancient culture, classical Chinese dance, vigorous physicality, timeless stories, 5,000 years of Chinese music and dance, Shen Yun presents authentic Chinese culture. Coming to Blaisdell Concert Hall, May 8th and 9th. Tickets at shenyun.com or call 808-792-3919.
Here's the deal. I'm Jay Fidel. I'm the host of Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, which is the Energy Policy Forum's program on Wednesday. That's how we call Wednesday Energy Wednesday. We call it Energy Wednesday every Wednesday. Are you surprised? Okay, and we try to get guys like Jim Alberts here from Hawaiian Electric who can tell us what's really going on in energy. We want to be informed. It's so important. It's the most important initiative in our state. Clean energy is major, okay? And that's why we cover it on this show. That's the deal. What do you think, Sharon?
I think that's great. That's why we're here every Wednesday from 4 to 5, and we hope you all join us so we can hear people like Jim coming on our show and co-host Ray Starling from Hawaii Energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here today. You've seen this. You heard what she said. What do you think?
I think it's a tremendous opportunity for people to come together and talk about the issues. Oftentimes there isn't a good forum to bring these key issues out into the public, and this is a tremendous way to go about it. And the activity of this show is essential to keep talking about energy because, as you said, it's such an essential part of our lives that we need to pay attention to it and we need to think about the future.
Okay, Ray, your turn.
Well, this is a special time in the history of Hawaii where we're making some pretty radical changes in the way we use energy and generate energy. And this show is the one place you can count on coming to every Wednesday and hearing something about the latest issues that are on the table, being discussed, that will affect us all going forward. So come join us, and if you have some ideas you want to share with us about energy, give us a call and let us know. We'll put you up here and let you talk for an hour. So come see us.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Jim. It's great to be, from ThinkTech's point of view, it's great to have this show. We love the show. It's our most important show. So come around and listen to us 4 to 5 on Wednesday. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to our final segment today of E Hana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. E Hana Kako comes from a venerable Hawaiian saying, E Pule Kako, which means let's pray together. E Hana Kako means let's work together. And think of the alternative, not working together. At the Grassroot Institute, we like to promote the idea of people working together for a better economy, government, and society. And I know a few people who are doing this so much as Professor Ken Schoolland is, a scholar at the Grassroot Institute, a professor at Hawaii Pacific University. Ken, really, the work you are doing is truly remarkable because it's not merely think tank work in the sense of ideas. It's taking those ideas and transforming lives. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes is an even more compelling and powerful story of principle at work. Now, there's some wonderful collaborators across the world who are helping to promote and develop the concept of private property ownership amongst the poor. You want to tell us a bit about them?
Yes, very much so, because with a little bit of contributions, it's roughly $1 per farm plot that they're able to establish this transformation for families. It's because they need to buy these GPS devices, do the maps, and do the training for this. And so one could go to the righttoproperty.org website that my daughter actually helped design for
Sure.
ARCH. Friends of ARCH is the Action, Research, and Community Health and Development Organization. That's a little bit lengthy, but the Liberty Institute of Baru Mitra, also the Center for Civil Society, and Samriddhi the Prosperity Foundation in Nepal. They're all working on that. And then internationally, the International Society for Individual Liberty is working to help them raise funds.
That's the
as
other
well as-
ISIL.
That's right, yeah, the International Society for We don't use the acronym so much now with all the other news in the news. But, and the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii has been very helpful locally because you've posted our article and our publicity about it. And at Hawaii Pacific University, we have an entrepreneur club that is raising funds for this India Property
Wonderful.
Rights Project. Yeah, so all of these have been helpful in putting it together.
Very good. And I'd like to remind all our viewers that you can download Professor Schoolland's own research on this subject at grassrootinstitute.org. Just go to the website and search Schoolland, S-C-H-O-O-L-L-A-N-D. Ken, here in Hawaii, there was a remarkable vision back in 1840. The king who was responsible for the Constitution at that time took a long and hard look at the Declaration of Independence of the United States and understood the importance of distributing property throughout. There was no such concept, and then shortly thereafter we had what was called the Great Mahele. And the whole purpose of the Mahele was to help Hawaiians emulate nations like the United States, where private property ownership was seen at the heart of individual liberty, at the heart of building generational wealth and so forth. Unfortunately, like many government programs, the Great Mahele didn't work out, and very little of that land is in the hands of Native Hawaiians. But a remarkable thing took place in the exchange of governance from the Kingdom of Hawaii to the nation, to the United States. After the abdication of Queen Liliuokalani, in the early 20th century, we had a good deal of land. Now it's the third or fourth largest land estate set aside by the federal government for Hawaiian homes, for those whose ancestors belonged to the prior kingdom and had Native Hawaiian blood, so that they would be able to be private property owners. Now, there's a lot of controversy over whether it's right to designate anything for any ethnic group in our country or not, but setting that aside, the federal government, in its wisdom at the time, felt that some kind of acknowledgement, people don't like to use the word reparation, but some kind of justice needed to be done, and they felt the justice would be to put that land into the hands of Native Hawaiians. And that's become the Department of Hawaiian Homelands today, which after statehood became part of the foundation of our statehood. People who are part Native Hawaiian can acquire plots of land, and they can build on them, but they're not exactly full fee simple because they can't sell them outside of the community of people who are qualified to do that. Do you see any parallels between this structure and what you're trying to promote in India?
Yeah, it seems like the government is just having troubles letting go. I mean, really, in a very paternalistic manner, they're still controlling how people use the land. And I'm not the expert that you are in the Hawaiian homelands, and I want to ask you about that. But it seems to me that a lot of these Hawaiians have been on a list for decades, and it's never been actually given to them. Whereas other people with more political influence have had use of lands, but you know, it's a matter of political influence rather than just giving people the rights to utilize the land.
There have been several problems with it. The original intention of the government to do justice by allowing Native Hawaiians to acquire land and build generational wealth somehow got bypassed as the years went on, through the typical things that happen in bureaucracies: fraud, waste, abuse, and that's been fairly well documented. And I'm not here to get on my soapbox about that, but the intention has been there, and under the current governor, Governor Ige, and the current administration that is managing it, they've made some strong affirmations that they want to clean it all up, that they want to get back to the original intention. But the problem is manifold. Although somebody can get a leasehold piece of property, they can't get the same financing that you and I might get for our homes on the open market. So they're paying quite a bit more because banks don't finance leasehold property because there's no security for that. Right. They can't get second mortgages, so they can't do improvements based upon that or fund the education for their children and so forth. And if they want out of it, they can't sell it on the open market. They have to sell it if they can find a buyer qualified at a price much lower. And so they really don't own it, actually. If they left it, the house would go back to the state and so forth. How do you have any ideas as to how we might motivate a change in this situation here in the state of Hawaii? What helped to motivate the government in India that might be applicable here? We're starting to see some voice coming from Native Hawaiians, but it's a subdued voice. We don't really hear them talking about this issue very much.
Well, I would say
a movement of the people.
Yeah, the way they responded in India was when there was a popular sentiment behind a large protest movement, and you know, maybe in large numbers they might get the attention of the politicians to change the law just to allow them to own the land. I mean, if all this time they've been saying that they're in favor of them, but they're not giving them the land, then I'd say it's just not true. You know, they're not really interested in giving them the land.
Well, I was amazed when I visited the homesteads recently in 2014. I had a lot of other activities then too.
Yeah.
And I went to homesteads on the Big Island and here and elsewhere, and I found that people were quite receptive to this idea. But the snag was always this: they always felt that if they bucked the system, which is their landlord, would retaliate. And we had people saying, yes, we would like to do this, but they'll, that is the managers, the owners of the state, won't let us happen. Was there that kind of fear or trepidation?
Tremendous, much more fear in India. But you know what? You know, there are transitions in popular sentiment. You know, the media got behind it and understood it. You know, and there are some cases which bring a lot of popular attention to a point that the politicians then respond to, and they changed the law. They passed this Forest Rights Act, which meant that the tribals had the right to work the land and to own the land and have rights to it, not to be just pushed off at their will. And it'd be nice if that sort of thing happened here. I think we'd have a lot less homelessness if people were allowed to, you know, homestead or own plots of land that they could improve on, do things with.
You know, one of the interesting features of the law in the 1920s, when the Homestead Act was established by the federal government while Hawaii was a territory, is that the qualification was linked to a percentage of blood quantum. That those who would qualify had to have 51%. But it was well known that the Hawaiians, being very open to other races and so forth, would intermarry and intermarry and intermarry from generation to generation. So one of the complaints made is that the government knew fully well that those qualified at the 51% would decrease and decrease and decrease, and the land would remain in the hands of the government. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, these are schemes to exempt, you know, to give the appearance of openness to the idea, but of really cutting off the door so that it won't happen. Yeah.
Well, you know, Ken, you have been fighting these kinds of battles for so long for the empowerment of people. We've got a last 45 seconds, and I'm just wondering if there's something on your heart that you'd like to share about the importance of liberty as the foundation for private property and for really the kind of lives people need to have.
Well, it's the source of our independence. It's not just and our ability to take care of our families and our communities by our independent action. We're not forever the children of government officials that are going to paternalistically guide our lives. We are our own masters and not the servants or slaves of government officials. They're supposed to be the servants of the public rather than the other way around.
Well, that's a great message to take across the world.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you for your work. Ken Schoolland is the author of The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible, something you'll want to Google and read from cover to cover. In that, he writes about the philosophy of liberty. It's a way of looking at life in which we understand that we ourselves have liberty and others have liberty, and when we begin with that foundation and respect one another in the social, the economic, and the governmental realm, we build a better society and have greater empowerment and fulfillment. It's been a delight to be with Professor Schoolland today, and we'll be back with E Hana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network next week.